Okay, how's the audio? All right, Brad, good deal.
Good.
Welcome to the 2021 Alabama section and Georgia section joint fall meeting and technical exchange. Got a good crowd here in person at the Talladega Super Speedway. If you've never been here, it's a pretty cool venue to have a meeting like this. And welcome to all the folks. I think we've got quite a number of folks, especially from Georgia, that are joining us virtually. So welcome to you all. If you're out there virtually, can you give Laura Beth or, okay, we're good. All right, so very good. All right, so again, welcome. My name is Blair Perry. I'm the current president of the Alabama section of ITE. Want to thank Laura Beth Yates from ALSITE, Chris Maddox, Tyler Martin, and Joe Gillis from Georgia ITE for working together to organize this meeting. The joint, the two states getting together, and also the in-person and the technical, the hybrid meeting. I know it took a lot of effort. So Laura Beth and the Georgia folks, thank you all for all your work putting this together. A couple of housekeeping items before we get started. If you haven't found them yet, the restrooms are in the back corner here. There are, as you walk back through the hallway there on the left, there's a little kitchen area. There are some drinks. There's a cooler in there. There's some waters and soft drinks. If you'd like one of those during one of the breaks. And how's the temperature? We turned it up from frigid to just freezing. Tim's still shivering. Do we need to kick it up some more? Or? All right. I'm seeing this from Tim and Carrie going in. So, all right, we'll kick it up a little bit to just plain cold. We'll try that out. All right. You want to introduce our first speaker? All right.
All right, so our first speaker we've got here today is Dr. Benjamin McManus from UAB. Dr. McManus is a developmental psychologist with expertise in information processing, attention, and driving safety in a variety of populations, including adolescents, individuals with developmental disabilities, and workers. He currently serves as the Assistant Director of the Translational Research for Injury Prevention, or TRIP lab at the UAB Department of Psychology. His research focus is occupational injury prevention through the identification of workplace risk factors affecting sleep, fatigue, and stress, and subsequently impacting critical safety outcomes, namely driving safety. He has established data management skills and statistical expertise in both ordinary least squares regression framework and maximum likelihood estimations, including advanced estimations with longitudinal data, mediation, moderation, and overdispersed outcomes frequently encountered in traffic safety variables. His analytical skills are highlighted among his 24 publications and K01 funded by the National Institute for Occupational Safety and Health to conduct a longitudinal study of sleep, fatigue, stress, and driving safety in surgical residents. So please welcome Dr. McManus.
Thank you for having me. Thank you for the introduction. Some of you I recognize, some of you have been to a driving simulator. I'm going to show you how to even experience its worst effects. I'm looking at Carrie there. For those of you who don't know me, I am Ben McManus, and as she said, I'm the Assistant Director of the Translational Research for Injury Prevention Laboratory at UAB. The number one question is probably, what role does psychology have within driving safety? And primarily it's just because right now we still have humans in the driver's seat. And so we look at the limitations, the capabilities, the human side of what would affect our ability to drive safely. And it goes beyond just what's happening right there in the driver's seat. And of course, there's many other factors leading up to it. So today I want to try to just tell you a little bit about what we have done, what our current directions are, and where we're moving forward in the future. I've even got some preliminary results from studies we've done and have just analyzed within the past few weeks, actually. So these are some of our newest findings. Maybe it will spark some ideas, some discussion, but I'll share that with you and tease where we're hoping to go in the future as well. So first off, I won't read off all the stats. I think everyone is well aware that traffic safety is a big issue when it comes to public health, which is where my research lab sort of fits in. Because as our name implies, we look at injury prevention factors And of course, one of the leading causes of death and injury in the United States is going to be due to motor vehicle collisions. And that's why we focus on this. But of course, you can tell, regardless of how you break it down, whether we're talking about pedestrian-related incidences, cyclists, heavy trucks, passenger cars, the number one cause of all these is really going to be due to driver error. So there are, of course, different times we do see equipment breakdown. There are some issues otherwise, but usually someone made an error somewhere, and this was both preventable and predictable. And so we are trying to look at it from that aspect, and how can we prevent these preventable and predictable incidences. And when it comes to driver error, the number one leading cause of driver error has something to do with inattention. And most of you are probably thinking distracted driving, especially when we think of younger drivers in training. That distracted driving is a big issue, but as those of you probably also know, we're seeing this happening in older and older age ranges as the phone especially becomes more and more integrated into just how we get through daily life. But it's not just driver distraction. We're talking also about attention is a limited resource. It's just like the fuel that goes into the car, which is that if you are on a long haul drive, like a truck driver, you've only got a limited amount of attentional resources. How can you keep those resources fueled, but how can you also make sure they don't deplete too quickly? And that's where my lab comes in and tries to look at these human capabilities, especially as it regards attention. And that's how we as psychologists got into driving safety. So at the Trip Lab, we have what we consider kind of our three main arms going on. We do a lot of research, a lot of what Laura Beth mentioned there, of course, is some of the research we have going on and how that affects our funding and what we do. That brings in the funding from NIH and CDC. But we also focus a lot on education. We have a lot of graduate students from a lot of different areas. It's not just psychology graduate students. We have had students from engineering. We have students who go on to medical school, become medical doctors. And so we are trying to grow our area. We've even got some we're trying to increase our communications area so that we can get the messages out a little bit better through social media, because most of us there still haven't figured out what TikTok is. But apparently that's one of the best ways to reach younger generations. So we're trying to grow education in that manner, bring in students from a wide variety of backgrounds so that we can better get the research and get the messages out. Additionally, we do some outreach as part of that. We go to high schools. We have a portable driving simulator we take with us. Usually it also helps if we bring candy and give that out to the high schoolers. They seem to pay more attention then. We've caught on to the idea of give people free stuff, they pay a little more attention. But we have that as part of one of our arms as well. Now today I want to spend most of my time focusing on just some of the research we're doing, some of the scientific findings, some of the new studies we have going on. But education as far as the next generation of researchers, as well as getting this out to the community, as the name translational implies, are two of our big pieces. And so that's a big thing to us. If you have any questions about that, I'd love to talk to you about them. But we do have those funded. We do have funding by the Regional Planning Commission of Greater Birmingham to go to high schools and communities within the Jefferson County area, where we can actually spread this message about not just distracted driving, but driving safety in general. But I'll focus on our research. And at the Trip Lab, we have four, if we want to group them, we have 4 areas of research, and they really kind of depend on what our population is. So we have drivers across the lifespan. That means we have compared, or we're looking at young drivers, our earliest drivers, 15, 16-year-olds. But also, if you've seen, and I'll show you a graph here in a minute, there's a U-shaped curve to injuries and fatalities when it comes to crashes. And so drivers older than 65 tend to have some disproportionate, injuries and fatalities. And so there's a lot of research that looks at comparing, let's look at our oldest drivers, let's look at our youngest drivers. We've done several studies down that realm. We've done looking at developmental disabilities. And by that, I mean looking at things which may impact your attention. So those with ADHD, those with autism spectrum disorder, all of these things have aspects which contribute to how your attention can be maintained and allocated when driving. So we do some research there. I'll tell you a little bit more about patients, because that one's a deep one for us. And then finally, my area of specialty specifically is occupational health and safety. So in other words, your work schedules, different factors about your work actually have a lot of lingering effects on your functioning outside of work. And imagine how that contributes to the fact that you've got to drive typically to and from work. But what about when your nature of work is driving, like commercial truck drivers, for instance? So just going into a little bit more on each of those, we have right now our biggest study going on is looking at the how driving attention develops. So we have nearly 200 adolescents, 16 and 18-year-olds, so we can compare on age. And we looked at them within 2 weeks when they got their driver's license. And we are following them for a year and a half to understand how does their driving, how does their attention, how do other factors in their life develop over the course of a year and a half. Because most studies are going to take this snapshot look at where someone is in their driving or where someone is in their development. But that doesn't tell us the whole story because it's not going to follow some consistent linear trajectory. So we're doing longitudinal studies there so we can look at how these things change over time, because the statistics really change right after licensure. And they change drastically, especially for our youngest drivers. And so we have studies going on about that. Again, developmental disabilities, our main two focuses are looking at those with ADHD, because as the name implies, you directly have a developmental disability about how you're able to allocate attention, and how hyperactivity also can influence how well you can allocate those resources, how you can control them. So we look at that also within our youngest drivers, but then we also look at autism spectrum disorder because there's growing body of research there. We're understanding that one of the most important aspects of life and feeling independent is being able to drive. Being able to get from point A to point B when you want to get from point A to point B is actually a big part of your well-being and your independence as an individual. And those with autism spectrum disorder may have difficulties getting there. So we're trying to look at how can we bridge that gap? What issues do we have going on for those young drivers who do have ASD? In patients, this is our biggest growing area. We've done some research with some surgeons at UAB looking at returning to drive after hip arthroscopy, looking at returning to drive after an ankle surgery, because these are all questions that clinicians have as far as there's no data that actually indicate when someone is able to return to drive after a surgery like that. It's usually made at the best discretion of the clinician themselves. Now, this applies also to other aspects. We've looked at returning to drive after a stroke, after a mild traumatic brain injury, or an even more moderate traumatic brain injury. And right now we have a study going on. I won't go too into the details of it, but it is our newest one starting up. We're partnering with Ohio State and Nationwide Children's Hospital up in Ohio, looking at developing a return to drive protocol for concussions. So, here in Alabama, of course, in the South, most of us have some familiarity with football and we're familiar with concussions. There are protocols for returning to play after a concussion. There are protocols to returning to think and schoolwork for those who are still, in school with a concussion. There are no return to drive protocols. There is no set way to determine if this individual is fit to return to getting behind the wheel of a car after their concussion. So we are doing a study where we're actually finding individuals, teenagers, 16 to 19, who get a concussion. We're going to put them in our driving simulator, and we're going to look at their driving every week, and we're going to see how that changes as they recover from the concussion. So that's our newest area of research, but we get a lot of interest from those at UAB, especially interested in, I've got this patient group, whether it's stroke, surgery, or brain injury. The families, the patients themselves always have questions about when can I drive again? And so we're trying to develop a data-driven approach to help determine when that might be. This is still very early in that research, so this is exciting to us. And then finally, like I said, this is my specific area of specialty, looking at aspects of your work, how that affects your driving. So my main two populations I've worked with are truck drivers. It is a different nature of attention when you're talking about a potentially 5 to 10 hour drive at a time. What that does to your attention and what you must do to maintain that attention as compared to, a 15-minute, 30-minute drive that most of us might do on a daily commute. So there are different aspects of attention there. More recently, my research has looked at healthcare workers. So surgical residents are my main area of interest. Those of you who have been to a doctor, had some sort of surgery, you likely were being treated by a resident. That resident has very interesting, I'll say, sleep patterns. And they have to still do surgeries. They still have to do procedures. They have to diagnose. And they do this for about 1 to 7 years, depending on their specialty. During that time, they are at an increased crash risk just because of their odd sleep schedules and the amount of stress they're under. Stress actually has a lot of impact on your attention abilities. And then you've got to get in the car after a long day when you've had little sleep, and you are responsible for people's lives, essentially, and their well-being. So we have studies going on there, and I actually have some findings from one of these studies I'll be able to show you a little bit later. So that's just a broad look at what our research goals are, and they all tend to center around our driving simulator. And again, if you have been to our lab, no doubt we took you here to show you this. Maybe you even drove in it. I know I already recognize several faces who have, and they have their own stories to tell about what that might have been. But this is a driving simulator where it's 2016 Honda Pilot. We are not far from the Honda factory right here in Alabama that actually makes the Honda Pilot. They donated the body of a 2016 Honda Pilot to us. We had it shipped up to Michigan, where the software company is that develops the driving simulator software. And they outfitted the simulator with the computer components so that we can use our driving simulator software and we can design any scenario, any weather condition, light condition, roadway conditions. And we do this so that we can customize situations that would normally be dangerous, but we can do here in a safe manner. So in other words, it's not ethical for us to take someone who's just had a TBI and put them on I-65 and say, let's have something jump out at them and see how they react. That would go poorly pretty quickly. We can do that in the simulator. We can have unexpected events come out. We can have them do different things. We can replicate distracted driving in the simulator. And that's what we consider our bread and butter studies is being able to put them through a distracted driving protocol and see what that does to their eyesight, see what that does to their driving specifically. Just a visual demonstration of what it is. Not only can we put people in it, but it can also drive autonomously. Because we are also interested in learning about some of the driving behavior in regards to autonomous driving. Again, the question we get about why, sometimes we'll get questions of why even put the effort to look at driving behavior, look at the human driver, if we're going to have autonomous vehicles. Most estimates say we're still a good 20 years away from that. The level of autonomy we're looking at now is still that it requires monitoring. It still requires you to be aware of the situation and be ready to take over. And so we have plans to do some research where we're looking at the ability to take over. How does that differ based on your age? We've even done a small study where we put a learning driver teen in the car in an autonomous situation and put their parent in the passenger seat next to them, not just to scare the parent, but to actually see how do they communicate. Because with autonomous vehicles right now, the energy is trying to get the user to understand what the limitations of the system are. Understand that you will still have to monitor this. Here's what this alert means. Here's what this alarm means. Here's that an indication that you might have to take over. And so there's a lot of research about trying to get dealers to educate the consumers on what those systems are and what their limitations are. But that's also going to spill over to when we talk about our learning drivers are going to be driving in cars that have these advanced features. Do the trainer, the parents, and the child, the driver, understand what those are and how do they communicate as they're learning these systems? So that's another area of research we have moving forward. But as you can see, we can replicate traffic levels. We can customize this scenery around it, and we try to make it look like the regions that they might drive through. So we try to make it as realistic as possible. As you can see from the video, it's a 100-degree field of view. You can't see it in this video, but there's actually a projection screen behind the car so that when you look in the rearview mirror, you see the driving environment behind you as well. So also on the dashboard, you'll notice these little red dots. Those are eye tracking cameras. So we have these other systems that go with our driving simulator. So our eye tracking cameras are able to pick up their eyes so we can understand in this driving scenario we've put in front of them, where are they looking? Because even though our expertise is attention is extremely hard to measure. You can't actually poke and prod and say, here's how much attention someone has, or here's what they're actually thinking about. We could ask you, but people tend to lie or tend to be inaccurate about where they are actually paying attention. But most of the time, where your eyes are is where your attention is. And so that's why we have a heavy emphasis on eye tracking systems in our driving simulator research. So we have those systems integrated so we can see where they're looking, and I'll show you some of what that looks like. We also have other measures of physiology. We have what's called a biopack. It allows us to get heart rate variability, which are measures of stress, galvanic skin response. We can get measures of their physiology to understand also what is their body experiencing, because that can be an indicator of stress or even that they're under a high cognitive load at that time. So we have all these systems trying to work together so we can understand fully what's going on in the driver as they're going through a particular situation or particular environment. So here's what our eye tracking will look like, just a still of it. So on the bottom half of the screen, you will see just these polygons, essentially. This is our driving environment that we have mapped out with the laser. This is a 3D rendered world model of our driving environment. So we have those 3 screens at the front, and inside you'll see that we've mapped out where the speedometer is, where the mirror is, where the AC, the radio is. We have all that, and that green circle you see somewhat in the middle is the driver's head. And so the eye tracking cameras are able to automatically detect the facial regions of our driver. As you can see on the top, it maps out the eyes, nose, mouth, things like that. And what it does is once it detects the eyes, it's then able to calculate where those eyes are being directed in regards or in context of that 3D world model we've mapped out below. And so from that, we're able to get a lot of data, and we're able to map what their eyes are doing over the scenery they're looking at. And I'll have some of those to show you as well. So this is an example of had someone in our simulator, and I had them texting while they were driving through this urban environment. If you will look to the right of the street at an intersection, you're going to see a car come out. And you can see when that green dot is off the screen, you don't see a green dot on the screen. That means the eyes are not up. The eyes are down looking at the phone, or they are elsewhere, could be closed. But this is all happening real time here. And so we can actually see when they look away, what they're looking at, what they're focusing on. And we can use this to also detect different patterns of activity. I'll show you an example of what we typically see with a young, inexperienced driver and how that differs from a more experienced driver in terms of where they tend to focus. So these are things we're able to do, but I can show you what we've used it for in some of our studies. So I told you our current main study, we have an acronym for it. We have an acronym for everything because we come up with too many words, so it's easier to use the smaller ones. So our main study here, roadway environments and attentional change in teens, we just call it REACT. This is one that was funded by the NIH. And I told you we were trying to understand some of what happens in the earliest months of driving, because in the first 18 months of licensure, that is the riskiest time in your life statistically. Truthfully, I will not get in a car with a 16-year-old driver, and it's because I've seen all these data and I do this research, because that is the riskiest thing you can do statistically. In the first 18 months of licensure, crash rates are the highest. And there have been reasons thought of as to why that might be. Young age, the brain is not physically mature at 16. In fact, the brain really is not fully developed until your mid-20s or so. So when we put a 16-year-old driver in a car, we're putting an immature brain in the car. So is it age? Is it the fact that they're 16? Or is it that they've not had a lot of experience? Even when you are a learning driver and you're being trained by a parent, guardian, or driving instructor, there's only so many situations you can be exposed to safely where there's someone there to offer the guidance. And of course, in your independent months of licensure afterwards, you see situations in traffic situations, environments that you did not before while you were in the permit phase. So is it just a lack of experience? And it turns out that there has not been any research to actually determine, is it age or is it experience or is it a combination of the two? And so Dr. Stavrinos, the director of the lab, she wrote the study about 4 years ago, got it funded by the NIH to actually finally do that. And so to do that, what we are doing is we're taking 16 and 18-year-olds. But first, I'll show you here why that matters, because from the eye tracking perspective, an inexperienced driver, I'm using some of our eye tracking visualization tools. They make pretty colors, so I thought I'd show them off. You'll see kind of a tunnel vision effect when you're looking at a very inexperienced driver. And if we were to block out everything around the areas that they're not focusing on, you'll see there's a lot of information that's being missed. And that is because inexperienced drivers tend to assume that the immediate thing requiring their attention is going to be directly in front of them. And so they tend to have this tunneling effect that we see. So if you look up here on the right, you'll see a pedestrian that's going to come very close to the sidewalk as if they're about to enter the road. And it's something that is going to be missed by our tunneled vision inexperienced driver. So this is an issue with inexperience. And again, we don't know, is it because of the immature prefrontal cortex, or is it because of lack of experience to understand that, hey, most of what's going to be a safety hazard to me is going to come from the side, probably not directly in front of me, or at least further off in the horizon. Now, an experienced driver down the same roadway here, you're going to see kind of like a flattened out left to right pattern instead. And again, this is, trying to determine, is this due to maturation of the brain, or is this due to experience of understanding that, hey, if there's anything that's going to surprise me, it's probably not directly in front of me. It's probably from some area that's blocked off to the side. And so you're going to see a much wider distribution of these glances over the course of a drive. And this is something that's been replicated pretty consistently when looking at young, inexperienced drivers compared to more experienced driver. Other things that can cause that tunneling: distraction. Sometimes, I'll say this with a grain of salt, I've said this before, for truck drivers, someone who has to drive 5 to 10 hours at a time, this might be a bit of a buffer, because on these long haul drives, we see that there's actually, when there's nothing going on, there's a proclivity to look away from the roadway and look into the cab. So something like a cell phone, a CB radio conversation actually keeps the eyes up a little more, because even though most people don't want to admit it, they realize that they are allocating some resources away from driving and onto the conversation, and therefore they need to compensate. And that means eyes forward. Now, what that means is you might miss what's going on outside of that tunnel, but your eyes are forward as opposed to looking around the cab if you're bored on a long haul drive. For teenagers or younger drivers or passenger car drivers, it's just that pure tunneling we often see on a cell phone conversation. All right, so within the study, it was pretty daunting to recruit them. We picked 16-year-olds and 18-year-olds. That's how we can look at age, brain maturation. So an 18-year-old brain is far more developed than a 16-year-old brain, but still not fully developed. We wanted to follow them for a year and a half. And oh my, is it hard to follow teenagers for a year and a half. But we tried. And then half of each group were non-licensed and were never going to get licensed. So we recruited 16-year-olds who said, I don't want to get a license. I don't plan on getting a license. I don't even have a permit. Great, we'll take you. Same for 18-year-olds, no license, no intention to get a license. And then the other half of each of those groups, 16-year-olds who got their license in under 2 weeks. So we're getting them right after they got their first license. 18-year-olds, this was the group really hard to find, just got their license. Most people, if they're going to get a license, get it at 16. They don't wait till 18. But we found about 23 of them who fit that group. So this allows us to understand over the course of 18 months, that's how long we kept up with them. We sent them surveys all along. They came into the driving simulator 7 times, so once every 3 months. And they drove through a course, and we did these eye tracking metrics on them. So over the course of 18 months, what happens? And so we have some results, and we looked at one safety critical event. And when I say safety critical event, I mean a potential hazard. So in that video I showed you, you saw a green car coming from the right of an intersection that came out as if it were just about to enter the intersection and cross our driver's path. Now, we set them up so carefully that we made sure they didn't actually come all the way into the road. That way our participants wouldn't crash with them and then think, oh, these researchers are out to try to make me crash. We try to do just enough to grab your attention, but not change your driving behavior. And so this is something that we would mimic, we would see in an everyday driving scenario, which is a car that comes out a little more suddenly than you expect, or is a little late to stop at a stoplight. And that's the case here. So what we did was we want to look at whenever their gaze, as indicated by this larger green circle, so we can also account for the periphery, whenever that intersects with that safety critical event, we're going to count that as it was a gaze. They looked at it. Now, to count as a glance, it must be for 0.75 seconds or longer. That way, they weren't just quickly scanning their eyes across, they looked and they focused for nearly a second. So over time, we didn't see an interaction effect of age or experience on that one hazard, but we did see age effects. And so what we saw was that at baseline, when we first got them in, regardless of licensure experience, 18-year-olds actually were less likely to even look at this hazard compared to their 16-year-old counterparts. And again, this is without regards to licensure or experience. But over time, the 18-year-olds began to increase that. They seem to improve over time in the probability of looking at that hazard. Then we had some other metrics. So looking at the total number of times they would glance at this. Now, we did this also, not just driving through the simulator, but we had them do it under conditions of either doing nothing, talking on the cell phone, or texting with us. That way we can see under these different cognitive loads, if you have other things going on, how do age and experience affect your driving and your visual attention under those circumstances? So what we saw was that no matter what, talking on the cell phone or texting is going to reduce your glances. Everyone understands that, nothing big there. But we do see it affects you differently depending on your age. So our 16-year-olds were more affected by the cell phone, meaning they looked a lot less at when they were on the cell phone compared to 18-year-olds. Meanwhile, 18-year-olds looked a lot less when they were text messaging compared to the 16-year-olds. So depending on whether we're talking about a cell phone or text message interaction, it differed on the age. 16-year-olds more affected by cell phone, 18-year-olds more affected by text messaging. So again, this is just one hazard. We got a long ways to go to see how it affects other things, because we have other hazards throughout this drive. But it also changes over time, as you can see, looking at our cell phone conversation, the graph that I have here, at baseline, our 16-year-olds looked less during the cell phone conversation, and that stayed stable over time. So the cell phone, same effect over the 18 months we had them in the study. Whereas for the 18-year-olds, the blue line here, over time, it actually seemed to get worse. They looked less and less while they were on the cell phone over the course of the 18 months we followed them. Some other things looking at the text messaging specifically here. So we did see some experience effects. So if you look at the bands on these graphs, you'll see that the pink band is very wide. That means there's a lot of variability. So even though that pink line seems to steadily increase, there's too much variation for that to be statistically significant from zero, different from zero. So our licensed at baseline, they looked less when they were in the text messaging conversation, but over time, they looked more and more. So it was like over time, our licensed group learned to look up more than our non-licensed group. So that is somewhat hopeful for our more experienced drivers, in that their understanding, it looks like over time, that they need to allocate more away from the cell phone while they're text messaging to look up as they're going through a drive. So again, these are still preliminary results, but wanted to share some of the newest research with you. So just summarizing what that might mean, again, we see that, of course, as you would expect, any secondary task is going to affect your vision when it comes to driving attention. But it looks like it depends on what medium we're talking about, how that might affect you at what age. Again, the 16-year-olds had a more detrimental effect from talking on the cell phone, and it was a handheld conversation, but really there's no difference between handheld and hands-free for the most part. You will typically see some of the same eye tracking behavior. Our 18-year-olds more susceptible to those text messaging effects. And we when we first came to these findings, we asked our lab why. Let's come up with some reasons. Still not sure why, but again, this is just one hazard we looked at. We've got several more to look at and combine all those into understanding what happens at different hazards. So like I said, this was just one hazard. We have these others that we're also going to look at from that same drive. So how does that affect with the pedestrian? We have a deer in the road also that they'll come across, cars as they come out. And the reason why we have a different variety of hazards is because from some of our other research looking at those with autism spectrum disorder, we actually found that there is a difference in how you react depending on whether it's a quote social hazard, meaning it involves a human, or it's a hazard which involves an inanimate object. Because typically, if it is a human involved thing like a cyclist, or you can see a driver in a car, our typically developing drivers react faster to that than if it is a barrel rolling across the road or a tumbleweed or something that's inanimate. So we want to see how these different hazards do affect our drivers, how age and experience encompasses that. So that is coming in the future. And we have other metrics from this same study. So we're also pulling crash reports. And I can already tell you out of the 190 people we have through the study, we only have 29 crashes out of those 100 or so, 190 or so. Only 2 of them had more than one crash. Right now, we're going through these crash reports to look at fault. So, but again, in addition to all this, we did a lot of cognitive tests because we're psychologists, and so we want to give you all these fun puzzle type tests, and we want to see how that affects, how does that develop over that same course of time? Because maybe we're not seeing development as it comes out in driving, but if we can see it in cognition, maybe that helps us explain why your attention is changing over that course of time. Why are you looking more over time, or why are you looking less? So then I'm going to finish up and tell you a little bit about some of the work I'm doing with healthcare workers. This is one of my favorite graphs to show because this is a surgeon's sleep pattern right here. This is if I recall, this was a 5th year general surgery resident. And if you just take an average of their sleep over the course of nearly a week, the average is not that bad. So most experts say 7 to 9 hours of sleep is what you need to perform optimally. And there's results from AAA that show every hour under 7 you get is going to increase your risk of an at-fault crash. But looking at actual sleep plotted over time consecutively from a resident like this one, it's not so much that they're averaging roughly 7 hours of sleep, but look at the variation. There's an average difference of plus or minus 3 hours of sleep from one night to the next. And there is research in teens that show that variation in sleep will affect your mood and some of your functioning. Imagine you got to wake up and go into surgery. Looking at that last dot on here, 4 hours, 4.32 hours of sleep. I talked to them the next day, and I know they spent about 3 hours in surgery after that night. So this is the situation that they have to go through. This is just their life. Sleep that might be 11 hours one day, 7 hours the next, 4, back up to 7, back down to 4, and they have to diagnose, treat, operate. So this is where I've been focusing a lot of my study. Recently, I've analyzed some data where I looked at how their sleep from one night affected the way they drove the very next morning. So again, we see that the amount of sleep you get has a definite impact on your risk of an at-fault crash the next day, but we don't know about specific sleep metrics because everyone focuses on sleep time. Did you get 7 hours of sleep or not? That's not all equivalent. You can get 7 hours of good sleep and you can get 7 hours of bad sleep. So I don't know why it panned away so quickly, but if you look in the bottom left, there's a red watch there. That is called an actigraph. That is just a research level Fitbit. And what I did in this study was I gave these surgical residents this Fitbit and said, wear it continuously. And that's how I was able to track their sleep over the course of up to 2 weeks. And so what this study is looking at is those sleep metrics at one night. How does that tie to their driving on a freeway loop the very next morning. So this is trying to replicate some of those dose response probabilities of amount of sleep and crash risk. So I had them drive in a nighttime scenario just around the freeway. It was 70 miles per hour. But as you can see from this kind of hard to see picture, it was dark. It replicates the early morning. Most of these residents had to come into shift at about 5:30 a.m. I saw them right before they went into shift. So yes, that means I got up at 3 or 4 to turn the simulator on for them so that they could drive in it and then immediately go into work and do life-saving things. But this mimics the daylight conditions that they'd be driving in, fairly dark. So some of the sleep descriptives from that night before, again, the averages look okay. They averaged about 7 hours of sleep, but you see a lot of variation. Some averaged, I don't know why it's speeding forward on me. Some averaged some got under 3 hours of sleep the night before they came in to see me. Some had about 13. That person or persons, they were probably coming in a day where they were on call the previous day, 24 hours, and they slept for about 13, and then they came in to see me. These other metrics, WASO, that stands for wake after sleep onset. That basically means after you first fell asleep, how many minutes were you registered as awake? Because sometimes you don't remember it, but you will wake up throughout the night for a certain amount of time. This accounts for that. SFI, sleep fragmentation index, that just means the percentage of restless sleep you got. So a lot of movement that the actigraph is detecting. And then sleep efficiency is looking at the amount of sleep you actually had relative to the time you were in bed. Because ideally, any amount of time you have in bed, you want to be asleep. This is why college students have such poor sleep outcomes, is because they do everything on the bed in the dorm rooms. They study, they eat, other things. But if it's all on the bed and they're not asleep, they're actually conditioning their body not to be asleep when on the bed. And that's not a good thing for sleep outcomes. So sleep efficiency is saying if you're in a bed, if we register you as you're laying down in the sleep, you should be asleep. That is best for your sleep health. So tying those to how they drove, again, they drove in this freeway loop. The speed limit was 70 miles per hour. Actually, we're able to see that over the course of that drive, which is about a 10-mile loop. I think it was 9.4 miles exactly, but this took about 10 minutes, 10, 11 minutes for them to complete. But over the course of that, speed decreased over time, but that decrease was less for those who had better sleep efficiency. So in other words, those who had better sleep efficiency maintained a more consistent speed. They did not have the aid of cruise control or anything like that. But those with better sleep were maintaining their speed consistently. Those without, we see a pretty steady decrease. So that blue line there are those who had some of the poorest levels of sleep quality. We see that maintenance of speed definitely takes a nosedive over the course of about 10 minutes. I looked specifically at straightways. So it was a loop, but I wanted to focus on the most boring stretches of this. And again, there's not a lot of scenery going on nearby, but those who had the poorest sleep quality, we actually see that they had a much deeper decrease in speed. And that was relative to whether you're looking at that wake after sleep onset or you're looking at something like the sleep fragmentation index. So the bottom line here is essentially that those with poor sleep quality do not seem to be able to maintain a consistent speed or control. There are other metrics to driving to look at, but wasn't able to get to them yet. These are still preliminary. But the bottom line, poor sleep, poor control, increased sleep, doesn't necessarily mean that they're driving better, but they are able to maintain. And this is not too different from what we see in distracted driving research, which is that if you see someone really slowing down, they could be getting on their phone. Typically, again, as a compensation mechanism, the eyes tunnel forward if they're on the road at all. The driving will slow down as a compensation. And this seems to be what we're seeing with some of the sleep outcomes as well. So this has then led to the next study that I'm doing called ResDrive, which is now let's follow surgeons for 18 months. 18 months seems to be our favorite time period. But what we're looking at is the NIOSH from CDC was interested in healthcare workers because the nature of healthcare is changing. There's a lot more home healthcare. There's a lot more travel nurses. And there are different restrictions on a lot of doctors and residents. And they want to know, how does work organization affect some of your well-being outcomes as well as your driving as a result? So this is a study from the CDC where I'm looking at how do their schedules, the groups that they're in, when do they have to wake up, how long are they there, on rotation? How does that affect things like their sleep and their stress? And then how does that go on to affect their driving safety? Because all of these things seem to take a nosedive, but everyone has this one question about residents, which is, well, do they acclimate? Do they get used to it? We know this all takes a nosedive when they start residency, but we assume they get used to it and they just learn to manage, but we don't actually have any data that suggests that. So this study is trying to understand that. All right, so I've talked enough, probably longer than I was supposed to, I don't know. But I just gave you a snapshot of some of our most recent findings. I didn't go into too much depth over other things we have going on at the lab, again, regarding some of our return to drive after injury, autonomous driving research. But I am glad to answer any questions you might have about any of those, as well as our education and outreach.
I have a quick question. You mentioned in your studies that there's really no difference in hands-free and holding the cell phone. That information shared with states that are making those calls to go hands-free, for example, Georgia?
Right. So the question again was asking about hands-free versus handheld. So the research there is again pretty specific to the eye stuff, eye movements, in that we don't see any difference in eye tracking or cognitive load with regards to the hands-free versus handheld. And the main reason why the states are going more towards the hands-free is to make it, as especially as I understand it, talking with some others, is that it's more about the enforcement aspect. That the best way, especially texting, is the worst by far. It takes your hands off of the wheel, eyes off the road, mind off the road. The others do two of the three typically. Mind and could be hands, or mind and could be eyes. But it's hard to enforce, as you can imagine. And so it seems that the reason why most states, or the states that are considering going to a pure cannot touch, cannot be in physical contact with the phone law, are for the enforcement side. So that is much more clear cut on an officer being able to see, I don't care what they're doing, the phone's touching their body. It could be a hands-free conversation. They could just be holding it on speakerphone, or they could be playing with Google Maps or text messaging, but it's more about making a clear-cut enforcement law. But that research, as far as the hands-free versus handheld, that's been out there for a good bit in regards to what it really does is that it doesn't make a difference on the cognitive load and the visual aspect of it. There might be some slight differences with regards to what you're able to do with your hands, 2 hands on the wheel versus 1 hand, but it's more about the fact that your mind is still having to allocate resources to the conversation. So. Yeah, so looking at some like distracted pedestrian things, yes. So we have done some work with that, and in fact, Dr. Stavrinos, the director of the lab, she got her start in pedestrian safety, and there is a pedestrian safety simulator at UAB as well, and basically it's used primarily for children in understanding the timing of the cars as they're coming and when they can step off. But we have done distracted pedestrian surveys there. And, from there, we do see a similar effect, of course. What we would need to do more in the future is if we can get eye tracking involved with pedestrian safety, to understand, depending on your, whether it's your age or what you have going on, how that affects your ability to cross the street. But this is where at UAB, there's been some work with, I believe, the researcher at UAB is Dr. David Schwabel. And I believe he's done some work with maybe computer science, where they have actually, I can't remember if they outfitted phones themselves with this, or they may have had a camera at a couple of intersections on campus where they were actually looking at crossing the street with regards to being on a phone. But it has the same detrimental effects. Of course, the worst of both worlds would be that there's also a high risk to pedestrians when the driver's distracted and they're, downtown, there's a lot of pedestrian crossways and having to navigate those. because a lot of times pedestrians aren't seen, even though it's a clear crosswalk and things like that.
Has there been any talk of modifying the licensure laws and the ages and all that, and changing how drivers are trained and that kind of thing?
Right. So the graduated driver's license laws, that is sort of what we are interested in being able to provide a little more evidence to, because when those were first coming out, there was the question of, if we shift the independent licensure age from 16 up to 18, fully independent licensure at 18, will that actually reduce the crash rates, or will it just shift them forward? And we might see a little bit of both from that, but what we're hoping to do with these results, and that most who are trying to research this, is understand, what does this mean as far as increasing ways to increase the experience aspect? We can't necessarily accelerate brain maturation, but if we were to keep 16 as our independent licensure age, or at least what it currently is in the GDL, maybe there are experience things we can increase. Maybe there are more targeted driver training strategies we can use, whether it's within driver's ed, or trying to use simulators. Not everyone's going to be able to use a simulator like we have, but even taking a simulator that can put forth a scenario where you can learn where the hazards would be. So that what this is really looking at is, the area of research is probably heading towards hazard training, in learning where hazards typically come from, where you should be looking. But it could have impacts on GDL laws, as far as, is there now data to suggest 18 is safer than 16? Or is it that regardless, it looks like we need to increase experience somehow? Right. Yeah, we do. And so the concept that she's referring to is called reactivity, which is, if you know you're being observed, you will act differently. And that's just unavoidable. So what we do is we give them instructions. We always tell them, look, drive as if you were in a real car on a real road. And what we do is, usually when you first get into the simulator, it takes some acclimation. Carrie can speak to that a little bit. But when you first get into it, we give everyone a practice drive. We give them the same practice drive. And what we see is, we try to interact with them very little once we put them in the car. And we try to have them forget you're in a simulator. And that's what helps. That is actually how immersive our simulator is. So we talk about it in terms of fidelity. There's a lot of driving simulators out there that are essentially a monitor and like a video game steering wheel. And that answers a lot of good questions, but it is easy to forget. It is not easy to forget that it's a computer screen and a steering wheel. So the advantage we have is that in our simulator, you have to open a door. You have to physically get into the car. You close the door and it's not chopped in half like a lot of simulators are. It's fully enclosed. The seat belt still works. The steering wheel still adjusts. The seat still adjusts. And we let them drive for a while, and we don't come up to them. We don't talk to them. We stay back. And what that does is it lets them immerse themselves in the simulator. That's also why we try to have that 180-degree field of view. And some indications we have that this is going to reduce reactivity is, we don't even tell them to put on their seatbelt. They just put it on. They start doing the natural car things when they get in the car. My favorite indicator is when they're about to merge into a lane and they actually look out for a blind spot, but they just see our carpet. That tells me that they're doing what they really should be doing in a car, and they're actually acting that way. There's always the possibility that they're not going to treat it with the pure amount of respect of, yes, this is a real car, I'm on a real road. But we see that with on-road assessments too. One of the shortcomings of on-road assessments are that they have to be a pre-programmed route, essentially, and there's usually another individual directly in the car with them. So even though we have all of our cameras and everything, we do try to stay far removed from our driver, our participant in there. That is something we do take into account. You're 100% right. We have to, understand they know that they're being observed. But that's where there's some research indicating that we want to try to give them a goal-directed assessment. So in the future, we're thinking about designing scenarios so that it's, put yourself in the situation. You're driving to, it's 7 o'clock, you got to run to Target. You need to get there at this time and you need to get back at this time. Give them some benchmarks or give them some goals. And we see that if you give them an incentive like that, you might actually be able to more recreate some real life behavior as opposed to, all right, here's a fancy tool, how about it? But that's definitely a concern. So we typically don't. That we just try to reduce the confounds we do have, because if we get real specific, we would have to either let them choose their own music, and then we would have to try to statistically account for what kind of music were they listening to so that we can control for that. Or we would just have to pick the same song for all drivers. That way it's all the same, in which case they might react differently. Some would hate it, some would love it. And so we don't have music in there, but in some other things we've done, we have embedded things within the scenario so that it would create a noise, for instance. And working with some of our drivers with autism spectrum disorder, I had a parent who asked, hey, my daughter gets real distracted. Can you make a real distracted sounding environment? I said, sure. And I dropped in music all across the scenario, and horns honking, construction sites, fire trucks. So that's possible for us to account for. But for most of our studies, we just have the radio off. That way we can reduce any temptation to touch any of the equipment. That way we can just focus on just the driving aspect. But in real life, that is definitely a concern as far as, looking over, trying to manipulate the radio, the AC, all of that.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
If y'all want to take just a quick 5-minute break, we will get the next presentation loaded and started here in just a second. Good morning. You're Glenn. I'm Laura. Nice to meet you. Okay, yeah, I had your thing.
Well, you know, we are.
We got you. We can hear you.
Let me close this.
Are you ready? Okay. All right, so next speaker is Glenn Taylor, who has been the manager of the ALDOT Regional Traffic Management Center in Huntsville since it opened in July 2018. Glenn's background includes attendance of the Alabama State Trooper Academy, 19 years in the Highway Patrol Division, and 6 years in the Alabama Bureau of Investigations Division. While in the Highway Patrol Division, he achieved the rank of sergeant. Glenn retired from Highway Patrol headquarters in Montgomery as the North Region Traffic Homicide Coordinator after 27 years of state service. And Glenn said he was going to tell you all a little bit more about himself. So I'll go ahead and stop there and let Glenn take over. Thank you, Glenn.
Good morning. How are y'all this morning? Cold? Yeah, I kind of wish I hadn't had a haircut this weekend. My bald spot's a little cold this morning. I'm glad I wore my jacket though, because I didn't know it was going to be this cold. I'm prepared. The trooper always tries to be prepared, even though I'm retired. I appreciate you letting me come down here and speak to you. I don't know that I'm going to be as engaging as the last speaker was. I liked his comments and his presentation. Having 27 years in law enforcement and most of my time spent on the road, I saw a lot of what he's talking about from the younger generation. Even from a personal standpoint, when my son decided that he wanted to take his eyes off the road to look at some lightning, so he says, and rear-ended a car in front of him. He was 19 at the time, and the first question I got when I got there was, "Are you going to kill him?" I'm proud to say he lived to tell about it. But I knew he wasn't looking at lightning, though. He said his cell phone was underneath his leg and he was talking to a friend. He was on the cell phone. Many years of investigative experience tells me that he was on the cell phone. So I brought that up to him a couple of months later. And it was an interesting response that I got. "How'd you know?" Years of experience. So my background, as Laura Beth said, is law enforcement primarily. Traffic incident management. I'm also a master trainer for the TIMS effort in the state of Alabama, and I'm the manager of the Regional Traffic Management Center. Those are the two topics that I'm here to talk to you about today. When it comes to the Regional Traffic Management Center, our friends from Georgia that are in the room, I don't think we're anywhere close to Georgia's effort in traffic management. They started in 1996, so they have a head start on us. Our regional traffic management centers didn't start. Carrie, maybe you can. 2013, Mobile's had one, and we'll talk about that in just a few minutes. They've had one for a long time for the tunnels, but primarily around 2013. Is that pretty accurate? And we just expanded in 2018 to the last TMC, which is in Huntsville, which I manage. Just a little personal background. As I told you, I have a son and a daughter. My son's 22, my daughter's 26. Both still live with me. I'm trying to figure out a way to get them out of the house, and any advice I can get from y'all would be appreciated. I married a firefighter, and she, thank you very much, was an EMT. We met on the scene of a crash in 1991. literally met on the scene of a crash, and we've been married ever since. We met on the scene of a crash, and I tell everybody it's been a wreck ever since. Wow, that one generally doesn't do as well. I'm proud of that one. I have to make a note and tell her later. I debated, and we'll get into the meat and taters of it in just a minute. And you can see I'm pretty animated. I'm having a hard time standing in one position here without walking back and forth when I talk. I started to tell an engineering joke, and I thought, man, I don't know. I'm a trooper telling an engineering joke. I don't know if you'd laugh or not. So I'm going to go for it. I'm going to tell you a story about telling an engineering joke, and you'll get the point. So in 2014, I had to speak to a group of engineers. I had to talk about crash investigation and some of the things out on the road. So I pulled up this joke, and I thought, man, that's clean. That's good stuff. I'll have to try it. Well, on the way to do the talk, I started getting cold feet with the joke. So I called up my buddy on the phone and I said, hey man, let me tell you a joke. And he's a trooper too. I said, let me tell you a joke and see what you think about it. Should I go forward with it? So I told him the joke, and I'll tell you the joke. The joke is, farmer sends his son off to college to become an engineer. 4 years, which I found is really good. He gets his degree and he goes back home. He's visiting his father, and his father says, show me something that you've learned, son. He said, Dad, I don't know what you're talking about. He said, show me something. I paid for your college. Show me something you've learned. He said, okay, let me see. Pi r squared. And the farmer looked at him. He goes, son, really? I paid money for that? Tell me something. He said, Dad, pi r squared. No, son. Pi r round. Cornbread r squared. So I'm telling my buddy, I didn't expect that laugh, to be honest with you. And I'm telling my buddy about it, and he just breaks up laughing. And I thought, I got a winner. This is going to be a killer. And he goes, I said, why are you laughing so hard? Is it that funny? He goes, no, man, I just see the faces of the crowd when you tell that stupid joke. I went, maybe I've got a joke how to tell a joke. I don't know. Anyway, so the reason I'm here this morning is to talk to you about the ALDOT Regional Traffic Management Centers. Basically, we're going to go over kind of an overview of the TMCs, supporting federal code, why we have the TMCs, what their purpose is, the TMC locations and hours, TMC info and data sources, and some of the tools that we use, and the resources that we try to employ to get information out to the traveling public. So the mission statement through DOT, and let me clarify something in my background. I'm a contract worker, one of the last from Gresham Smith in the TMCs that manages for ALDOT. So I'm kind of talking on behalf of ALDOT through a contract worker's point of view. ALDOT says that the Alabama ITS program vision statement is to seek innovative solutions and apply new technologies in ITS to maximize the safety and mobility of the transportation system in Alabama. What is our mission? Our mission is to provide safety for the travelers in the state of Alabama. Same mission I had as a state trooper. And I can tell you, and I'll take a little side note to this, make a little side note to this. I've written the tickets, I've worked the wrecks, I've seen the dead bodies, I've done the notifications, all that in 27 years. Writing a ticket gets people's attention a little bit. Changing the roadway systems gets it a lot. ITS, I started doing my research before I got this job on ITS from a trooper standpoint. I believe in ITS more than I do in enforcement. Enforcement just makes people mad most of the time. You can see this as an example by driving down the road, how many people actually do the speed limit. Not a soul in this room, I guarantee you, including me on the way down here this morning. Okay. And is there a threat or deterrent by getting a ticket? Georgia tried to go up with their fines. They went up in the, who in here is from Georgia? How much is a speeding fine over there? Yeah. And I've heard up to 500 in some cases. Yeah. So deterrence, ITS is, I believe, and it's my opinion, that ITS is actually better than enforcement. And I think we need to put more effort into the ITS. That's the reason I believe in the mission statement and the vision. You can read the mission statement to use ITS technologies at a cost-effective and efficient means to improve safety and maximize the overall performance of the transportation system in Alabama. That was my mission statement as a trooper as well. So that's why I bought into the ITS system and wanted to be a part of what's coming with the RTMCs. What's the purpose for it? What's the federal code that supports it? CFR Title 23, 511, and it goes into talking about real-time information program, defines what a real-time information program is. And it talks about the notification time to get out through the Federal Highway Administration, the CFR. In order to get information out to the traveling public, we have 10 minutes in an urban area, urban area, and 20 minutes in a rural area. And that's kind of a generalization, okay? So we have to get information to the traveling public out within that time frame. How do we do that? Well, ALDOT selected the RTMCs, the traffic management centers, to do that. So that's our purpose as a TMC, is to get information out to the traveling public in a timely fashion. The effective date was November 8th, 2014. So that's what the regulations mandate. And that's basically the same slide for November 8th, 2014. All right. So ALDOT has 5 traffic management centers, and I asked Carrie just a minute ago about it, and you heard the answer. Mobile started first with the tunnels. They had some semblance of a traffic management center monitoring the tunnels on a daily basis. Then you have Birmingham, which came next, which was roughly 2013, I think, somewhere around that time frame. And they are still there. You have Montgomery, which came next, then Tuscaloosa, then Huntsville. Huntsville's where I'm at. All of the above, all the ones that I just named off, with the exception of Huntsville, and that's we're in works and trying to get it full time or 24/7. So we have staffing there 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. They're monitoring ITS devices, which I'll cover in just a few minutes, on a daily basis. Huntsville, we are right now 6 o'clock in the morning till 10 o'clock at night based on staffing. We are trying to increase our staffing to where we can go 24/7 as well. One note to that, Huntsville just recently became the largest by population city in the state of Alabama. I don't know if you're aware of that. We have a very high volume of traffic. This I know from working the crashes. And we're working toward becoming 24/7 so that we can provide information to the public on a daily basis, on an hourly basis. All the venues that we're talking about, all the TMCs have ASAP programs. Mobile, Tuscaloosa, Birmingham, Huntsville, and Montgomery all have at least one ASAP truck. We're the smallest. We have one. He started in June. So we're trying to get that program off the ground as well. As you can see up there in the slide, Huntsville opened July 23rd, 2018. We've been there for about 3 years. One thing I will note, since I'm here to request Dr. Anderson from UAH. UAH is the one that houses the TMC in Huntsville. And we're appreciative of everything that they've done for us over the past 3 years. The other, Birmingham, Montgomery, both have our ALDOT facilities. Tuscaloosa is on the campus of UA. And as my buddy who's the manager down there likes to say, they have 7 busy days a year because they have game day at the university. So they're getting information, traffic signaling, all that information passes through the TMC. We don't have any events like that are that big in Huntsville, but we have a lot of volume of crashes, a lot of volume of traffic. Of course, I just mentioned Tuscaloosa. They opened in 2017. So what's the operations and the functions of the RTMC? The RTMC is to disperse traveler information, traffic incident information, congestion information, and special events information. The TIMS timeline, as you can see, is the incident occurs. Well, let me just say this. That is a TIMS timeline. If anybody in here is familiar with TIMS, traffic incident management, that is the timeline that we use for all incidents on the roadway. From the time that the incident occurs to the return of traffic to normal flow, that is the TIMS timeline. And that's basically what the TMC operates off of. So TIMS and the Traffic Management Center go hand in hand. Some statistics. Just in from June of 2020 to June of 2021, we entered in the TMCs across the state of Alabama over 26,000 events. Total events entered, and those are crash events. Total events entered for the same periods, 134,000 events. That includes construction events, maintenance events, crash events, abandoned vehicles, anything that we have to notify the public of, those are included in that number. So by comparison, the crash events that we entered, 26,000, there were actually 71,746 crashes during that same period on mile posted roadways in the state of Alabama. One thing to clarify, the Traffic Management Center only reports out or is concerned with incidents that happen on mile posted roadways, state and federal routes. So we do not count anything on county roads. That 71,000 in the state of Alabama, that is mainly on state and federal routes. Okay, there are a ton more wrecks than that. Trust me, I think I worked about half of them. So what are some of the resources that we use in the TMC? We use cameras, social media, media outlets, speed data, CAD systems, radios, and scanners. All right. I'm done, thanks. My time's up. Anyway, just wanted to wake you back up. That's what happened. So we have CCTV cameras that we monitor in the TMC in Huntsville. We have a total of 30 across North Alabama. Birmingham has well over 100. Montgomery has probably close to 100. Tuscaloosa has over 100. And Mobile, I'm not even sure what their numbers are. They have a ton of resources. Cameras are just one of the resources that we use, though. That's for the areas that we can see. We use social media. We monitor Twitter. We monitor anything that may provide a notification for an incident on the roadway. Media outlets. We watch the news. Speed data. We have, I don't know how many of you in here are familiar with HERE data. I wasn't until I came into the RTMC. But HERE data is phone data that's being retrieved, speed and direction. Somebody a lot smarter than me created an EKG, what we call an EKG, which is a line graph of speed and direction. So we use those on the major roadways such as I-65, 565, I-59, all the interstates, major routes. We use EKGs that show us a basic speed and direction. When that speed spikes, goes down, we start from the Huntsville TMC perspective, we start looking in that area to see if we can find other sources that are telling us why is the speed going down. So that's another source of information, speed data. And CAD systems, and I'll talk a little bit more about that one in just a second. Radios and scanners. With technology, you now have access to some scanners that we didn't have available when I was a trooper on the road. So we can actually through the internet, pipe in scanners and listen to local police departments or fire agencies. We may catch a crash that way. So we employ every means that we can to get information into the TMC so that we can pipe that information as quickly as we can based on the federal standard back out to the public. You got our main application is Algo, as you can see. Algo is the application you can put on your phone and or access through the internet, which gives you locations. The big red dots up there, crashes in North Alabama at the time that I took that picture. I took a snapshot of that. So those are, you can click on that and I'll show you. Well, I thought I had another slide in there. The application, I'm pretty sure it's later on. The application shows you direction of the crash. It'll show you if lanes are blocked, what lanes are blocked. That's information that we get from our resources. And it can give you when the event actually started, when it was entered. So you've got an idea how long it's been there. So for the traveling public, the Algo app is the same as Waze, with the exception of this. Waze is user submitted, which means, and we see a lot of it in the TMC. Somebody drives by and sees somebody sitting on the side of the road using a cell phone, and they assume it's a crash, and they'll put a crash out there. That's not a crash. It's not impeding traffic, but all of a sudden it pops up and everybody thinks there's a crash there. With Algo and through the TMCs, we are double verification in Huntsville. We have two methods of verification that event occurred or is on the roadway, or we don't put it out to the public. So it is verified information. If you get it from Huntsville or any of the other TMCs, most likely it is verified information, it is good information. Some of the resources through the CAD system, the computer-aided dispatching, we have partnered with 6 out of 13 counties in North Alabama. Actually started in Huntsville. Well, let me back up. Tuscaloosa had a CAD system with one of the local agencies where they could actually view all the dispatching that was going on. So they saw it as it happened. It was dispatched out to the public. I mean, dispatched out to the responders. We took that and went a little bit further in Huntsville. We met with the 911 system in Huntsville and partnered with them to send us automatic notifications. So when their dispatchers enter in a crash, the system parses out that crash and sends us an automatic email to the Huntsville TMC. We're at this point, we are right at 91% reporting in Madison County alone out to the public of all incidents that happen. That's impressive. And it's done through the 911 center. You can see up there, we partnered with the city of Huntsville, Madison County 911, Morgan County 911, Limestone County, Coleman County, DeKalb County, and Colbert County. So we've got 6 out of the 17 counties right now covered. We are currently talking with 3 of the other counties, trying to get us 100% of the 13 counties information flow into the TMC. Our goal is to be somewhere, and this is a lofty goal, but I think it's achievable. Our goal is to be 90 to 95% information flow coming into the TMC with that same information flow going out to the general public. So the traveling public has accurate information from all of our region. And one day, the 911 systems get to the point to where they're communicating. Maybe we can have a centralized information dump going out to all of our TMCs from all the counties through the 911 system. We've also partnered with UAH, as I said a little while ago. UAH housed us and took us in and gave us a home, and we absolutely appreciate that. So this is the information that we get from those resources. What is it? Where is it? What direction? How many vehicles and type, if possible? What lanes are affected? And what is the damage to ALDOT property, if any? And that's one of the things that we can do from the TMC as well, is be a one-stop shop for ALDOT. That's something we're working toward in Huntsville. I know it's being done in other TMCs across the state. And that is, if you've got outside agencies like the state troopers or Huntsville PD, and I'm using North Alabama because that's where I'm from, Huntsville PD or Decatur PD that needs to get in touch with ALDOT, instead of having to search for a number to find 3 different people to call to say, I'm not the one on call, you need to call so-and-so, they can pick up the phone and call the TMC, and that information goes, the TMC has the call tree, they can call the right people and have a good response. One of the things that we've talked about in the past, and I hope we can get to the point where we can do this, is saving DOT some money and time by, and I'll give you an example, a tree across the state highway. You have to call out a crew to go out there and do that, which takes time. And sometimes, and what I'm hearing most of the time, by the time DOT gets there, that tree's been removed by the local fire department. Well, in an effort to save time, if the TMC is aware of it and they're doing the calling, we can monitor it. And as soon as we know that tree is removed, we can cancel DOT's response. And you'll save, I believe you'll save some time and some manpower time and money. And DOT, as far as damage goes to property, we had one on I-65 yesterday, went into the cable rail barrier. So we can notify DOT that there's damage there to the cable rail as well. And of course, the bottom one I just spoke about. The pictures you see in that are the ATMS software, which is a standalone proprietary software for DOT. That's where we enter the event, and that's where the event takes off and goes out to the general public. One other thing, just a minute ago, I had a screen up that had Twitter on there. Right, currently, Huntsville has almost 4,000 followers on Twitter. Birmingham, all of us have a Twitter account, and if you signed up to follow our Twitter account, you get an automatic notification of an event when it goes out. So when we enter it into ATMS system, it goes out to our website and also goes out and hits the Twitter account, and you'll get an automatic notification. Talked about the ASAP program, but just some of the things that they provide. Traffic control, changing flat tires, jump starting vehicles, providing water for overheated vehicles, and providing limited gas. And there's more. They help with traffic control a lot. With the one that we have primarily patrols 565 in the morning time between 6 and 2. We're scheduled or slotted to have a new one start next Monday, actually, in Huntsville. And he'll be out there patrolling as well in about 8 weeks once he gets trained. So we'll have 2 shifts on 565. They are welcomed by law enforcement. I can tell you, when we met with Huntsville PD and told them there was a possibility for ASAP in the Huntsville area, the first thing the assistant chief said was, "I'll take 8." And I went, "I don't know we can provide 1 at this point, but we'll work toward it." And we finally got there in June of this year. The ASAP program is across the state. Birmingham has multiple vehicles with multiple shifts, and their schedule was shown earlier. What their schedule is in Birmingham, Tuscaloosa, Montgomery, and Mobile also have the ASAP program. Talked about the website. That's what the website looks like. If you go to the website, you can also access the cameras for a limited time. It buffers about, it'll shut you down after about a minute of time video, streaming video. And you can pull up whatever cameras we have available at the time out to the public. Now, one of the things that we can do through the website, if you can see the cameras, we can also cut the cameras off. We had a major crash. Actually, it was Christmas Eve of 2019. Fatality, crossover, cut the car in half, and we were able to cut the video off so that the public couldn't see what we saw. Okay, so we do have the capability of doing that. The website also houses the construction zones, what I call construction zones, or maintenance and construction. So you'll be able to see a construction zone on a roadway before you get there, and you'll know the duration of it if we have that information available. And that's the information I was talking about just a minute ago. If you click on an individual icon, whether it's construction and or crash, it'll bring it up and show you the lanes that are blocked if we know, and it'll give you the direction of the crash and when the crash actually started, which is handy information to know. If you got a minor crash and it started 45 minutes ago, I'm probably going to take my chances on going through there because it's probably already gone. It just hasn't been removed. Huntsville's hours of operation are from 6 a to 10 p Monday through Friday. As I said earlier, that's our TMC number if you want to write it down in Huntsville. And that's my personal cell phone number. I appreciate that. If you wouldn't give it out, my wife gets tired of me getting strange phone calls in the middle of the night. That's a joke, or at least an attempt. So that's what I wanted to talk to you about with the Traffic Management Center. Now, Traffic Incident Management, on the other hand, is another initiative. I'm a master trainer. We have 5 master trainers right now in the state of Alabama through the National Highway Administration. Federal Highway Administration. And we teach traffic incident management. How many in here know anything about TIMS? Anybody been through the class? Georgia's version is Tom. And we're trying to get to the point of getting where Georgia's at, to have TIM teams. We're working in that effort. What is traffic incident management? So basically I don't know that I want to tell this one, especially after this past weekend and the way they ended up. But so if you have a team, and when I teach the class, we just had one last week, I teach this. TIMS is equivalent of when you have a team that has a quarterback who doesn't know what the line's doing, the line doesn't know what the running back's doing, and the wide receivers ain't got a clue what anybody's doing. What do you have? And I get a lot of times I get Auburn. And I was an Auburn fan, but anyway. What do you have if you have a quarterback knows what the line's doing, and the running back knows what everybody's doing, and the wide receivers know what they're supposed to do? And I always get Alabama. Like I said, this past weekend, that didn't seem to be the case. But if you have a concerted effort through team play on a crash scene or on an incident scene out on the roadways, you clear that faster. Why do we want to clear it faster? Well, there is a staggering statistic that when I first taught this class, when I first learned this class, scared me to death. And that is, for every minute that an incident is on a roadway, there is a 2% chance that another incident and a more severe incident may occur. So think about that. At 50 minutes, where are we at? At 50 minutes, there is a high probability of a secondary crash or a secondary event. And while all your responders are on the first event, the secondary is going to have to wait a little bit longer to get to. So it may end up being a lot worse. I started teaching TIMS, went to the class. I was voluntold to go to the class. My captain called me and said, "Hey, you want to go to this class in Emmitsburg, Maryland for traffic incident management?" I said, "No, I think I'll pass." He goes, "No, I don't think you understand. You want to go to this class, don't you?" I said, "Yes, sir, I'll be glad to." And I ended up in Emmitsburg, Maryland. And I went up there with an attitude, not thinking that you could teach me, because I'm a reconstructionist. Anything about crash investigation, I was wrong. Managing the scene is not teaching you how to investigate the crash. It's not teaching you how to flag traffic. It's teaching you how to manage that event so a worse event does not happen. And how do we manage that event? We manage it as a team. Getting fire and law enforcement, getting towing and recovery, EMS, anybody who may respond on the same page, working out of the same playbook, and that is TIMS. I believe in it. I have formed a friendship with a firefighter from up there. We've been friends since 2014, and he is now the manager at the Tuscaloosa TMC. He's a retired firefighter. My wife sometimes calls him my bromance. I'm not sure how that goes. I generally talk to him more in the afternoon than I do my wife, so I guess that's why she says that. But TIMS is something, if you haven't been, even in Georgia, if you haven't been in Alabama, please find a class and go to it, especially if you have anything to do with traffic. And I say that because you're going to get 6.5 to 7 hours of very valuable information about how to manage a scene. About a month and a half ago on I-65, just south of Athens, we had a trooper who rolled up on a scene. Actually, it's one of my traffic homicide investigators. He rolls up on a scene. It is a tractor trailer who was backed up in the queue from a construction zone. Temporary backup. The backup clears. The tractor trailer tries to pull off. His vehicle was disabled. He couldn't pull off. So he's stuck with a cable rail barrier to the left. He's stuck in the left-hand lane and nowhere to go. So the trooper pulls up behind him and parks, gets out. They call for a wrecker. Wrecker will be there in 30 minutes. Guess what? An hour and 35 minutes later, the wrecker's still not there. And the trooper's still sitting behind him, doing his job in his car when he is struck by a vehicle at 90+ miles an hour. That 1 minute, 2% rule, it was bound to happen. That's why it's important for traffic incident management for us to know how to manage incidents out on the roadway and do everything in our power to make those things go away as quickly as we can and safely. And that's what Tim's is all about. So those are the two things that I wanted to kind of bring you up to speed on and talk to you about. Like I said, I encourage you, if you can, to get into a traffic incident management class somewhere. Outside of that, I think I'm pretty much done. It was shorter. I saw most everybody's eyes up, so I didn't put anybody to sleep. That's a good thing. Anybody have any questions? Yes, sir.
You still got your slide up there with the hospital number. You mentioned waves and everything. What's the best way for us, if we're going along, say we're driving up the interstate and there's a what should we do?
Okay, so the question is, if there's something in the roadway, basically, how do you report an incident, and where do you report the incident? The Algo app, we have numbers for, and some of them are public, some of them are not. Huntsville's number, that's the reason I put it up on the screen. It's not a public number yet. We are going to make it a public number. The Algo app, I believe, and I've never looked it up, should have the number for the TMC, but my suggestion is to contact your local law enforcement first so they can get somebody out there on the roadway to get that removed. Or the ASAP program, if the TMC is doing what they're supposed to do and monitoring, they should hear that. And if they've got an ASAP driver close, they should send the ASAP driver by to help out, at least help out, and or get it out of the roadway. That answer your, okay, good. Yes, sir.
I have a question about the ASAP hours and this somebody else, but I saw, like Huntsville, I know it's newer really around the state as a whole, but it was 6 to 2, 6 to 3. So they get that morning rush hour, but are there plans with that evening rush hour? Because I know around 565, the car breaks down or red,
Right.
I mean, how hosed up you
Yes, yeah.
So, and
Even without a wreck, it gets hosed up.
right. And so I figured having those ASAP trucks out there, the debris in the road, having somebody out there to help get that moved over quicker, delay help the congestion or help congestion get back to them.
So the question was the hours of operation for ASAP, if there's room or future, what the future holds for the hours. Birmingham right now is running 2 shifts Monday through Friday, I believe. Montgomery is running, I think they've got 2 ASAP drivers and they may be running 2 shifts as well. In Huntsville, as soon as we get, I know Tuscaloosa is running 2 shifts. Most of the time it's Monday through Friday and special events. In Huntsville, we've got one starting this coming Monday. And as soon as we get him off for training, we'll have afternoon as well. We'll have, generally he's going to overlap the day shift and catch the evening rush hour. So I defer to Kerry. You have anything to add to that? Yes, I think you're right. I kind of forget Mobile because they're so far. Yes, they are.
Except for Huntsville, the other programs do have morning and afternoon coverage.
So does that answer your question? Okay. All right. Any other questions? Yes, sir.
Yeah, during the production, we have a before the hour.
Yes, sir.
You have to call in and submit that. Is something that you all have?
We actually just started that within the last year, but yes, sir, we have something very similar to that. And the question was a traffic interruption report. Does Alabama have that? Yes, we do. Any questions? Either I did really good or. We do not. No.
Well, I know in Georgia they're doing kind of like state
The hero trucks.
Right.
Yeah. yeah, we've seen that, and I'll let Carrie.
There's been some talk of legislation that would protect that. Nothing's come about yet.
All right. I think I'm done now.
All right, lunch is on its way, so